"Keep your daughter away from that man!" The words sliced through the crisp morning air of Silverwood Park like broken glass. Heads turned, conversations froze, and the faint laughter of children fell into silence. Claudia Whitmore's polished heels clicked sharply against the pavement as she pointed an accusing finger toward a man kneeling in the grass. That man was Daniel Carter, 36 years old, his uniform smudged with earth, a battered toolbox at his side. His left leg bore a slight limp, the kind that came from wounds long healed but never forgotten. He wasn't a stranger to stares, yet this moment was different. Because right in front of him, little Amelia Gray, just 7 years old, had spoken her first word in 3 years. "Hello," she had whispered, her voice trembling but clear, as if breaking through layers of silence that had held her captive since the accident that took her father. Her mother, Eleanor Gray, froze. For a second, she forgot to breathe, her chest tight as if the world had stopped spinning. She had poured fortunes into therapies, hired the best specialists, but nothing had unlocked Amelia's voice. And now, in the space of a heartbeat, this quiet groundskeeper had done what millions of dollars could not. Claudia's words rang louder, carrying the weight of superiority. "You can't allow your daughter to interact with people like that in our community." Eleanor's eyes darted from Claudia's immaculate poise to Daniel's calm, steady gaze. There was no defensiveness in him, no shame, only a quiet strength that unsettled her more than Claudia's fury. Amelia clung to his sleeve, her small fingers refusing to let go, her wide eyes shining with a hope Eleanor hadn't seen in years. In that fragile moment, one thing became clear. This encounter was no accident. It was the spark of something much larger, something that would challenge every assumption, every unspoken rule of this neighborhood. And as Eleanor tried to steady her breath, she realized the question wasn't just why her daughter had chosen to speak now, but why she had chosen to him. To understand why one whispered word could send shockwaves through an entire community, you have to step inside the world of Silverwood. On the surface, Silverwood was picture perfect. Rows of identical white fences framed manicured lawns where sprinklers hissed in synchronized arcs and gardeners trimmed hedges into flawless symmetry. Morning sunlight bounced off polished SUVs parked in spotless driveways. Even the air smelled curated. Lavender from imported shrubs mingled with the faint citrus of cleaning sprays used on benches the night before. But beneath the surface, Silverwood was more than a neighborhood. It was a stage. Every interaction, every gathering at the playground or community center was a performance. Who wore what? Who drove what? Who was invited and who was quietly left out? And like any stage, there was always someone controlling the script. That someone was Claudia Whitmore. Claudia wasn't the richest resident nor the most accomplished, but she held a title that mattered more in this bubble of privilege. President of the Silverwood Homeowners Association. She dictated what color a front door could be painted, which plants were acceptable for front lawns, and most importantly, who was considered appropriate company. With her sharp heels and sharper tongue, she enforced the rules not with violence, but with something far more enduring: social exclusion. It was Claudia who had shouted across the playground that morning, finger raised toward the man crouched in the grass. To her, that moment wasn't about a child speaking. It was about a line being crossed. Eleanor Gray had crossed many lines in her life, but never here. A tech magnate, CEO of a medical innovations company, she was used to rooms where her word alone shifted millions of dollars. She carried herself with the kind of quiet authority only earned through years of clawing her way up in an industry dominated by men twice her age. Yet for all her wealth and power, Eleanor lived in Silverwood not for status, but for her daughter. Amelia was 7 years old. She should have been running across the lawns, shouting, laughing, singing. Instead, for 3 years, her voice had been locked away behind trauma, the kind no money could fix. Since the accident that took her father, Amelia had retreated into silence so profound it haunted Eleanor at night. She had flown in specialists from New York, San Francisco, even Zurich. Speech therapists, trauma experts, neurologists, $500,000 spent, countless hours endured. Nothing, not even a whisper. And then, on an ordinary morning, her little girl had spoken. Not to Eleanor, not to a doctor, but to Daniel Carter. Daniel's presence in Silverwood seemed almost accidental, like a brushstroke out of place on a perfect canvas. His uniform was worn, his work boots stained with soil. He arrived before dawn most mornings, pushing a squeaky cart filled with tools, trimming roses, or mending fences, while most residents still sipped their lattes indoors. To the majority of Silverwood's elite, he was invisible, a background figure, a shadow that made their privileges possible. But Eleanor noticed things others did not. She noticed the way his eyes constantly moved, scanning, cataloging. She noticed his posture, too straight for a man beaten down by labor, too alert for someone with nothing to lose. She noticed the scar running down his forearm, the subtle limp in his step. Details others dismissed as hard living, she saw as something else. Remnants of a life far larger than a tool cart and a patch of grass. And then there was the way he spoke to Amelia. He didn't crouch with the false sweetness of adults trying to coax a child. He lowered himself quietly, patiently, as if waiting for Amelia to set the pace. And she had. For the first time in nearly 2,000 days, her lips formed a word. It shook Eleanor. Gratitude surged in her chest, tangled with suspicion. Who exactly was this man? What gave him the ability to reach her daughter when armies of professionals had failed? Claudia, of course, had her own explanation. Within hours of the incident, whispers were spreading like smoke. At the cafe, did you hear? The gray girl spoke for the gardener. At the gym, it's inappropriate. He shouldn't even be near her. By evening, it was no longer whispers, but pointed warnings. Claudia cornered Eleanor at the community pool, her pearls catching the sun. "Be careful," she murmured, voice soft but heavy with suggestion. "Men like that always have an angle. You don't want your daughter tangled in something unseemly." Unseemly. The word echoed in Eleanor's mind as she tucked Amelia into bed that night. She watched her daughter sleep, lips parted as if 1,000 unsaid words hovered just behind her dreams. She wanted to believe Amelia had spoken because of something pure, something hopeful. Yet doubt lingered. Had Claudia been right all along? Still, another voice pressed louder inside Eleanor. The memory of Amelia's eyes, lit with joy, clutching Daniel's sleeve as if holding on to the very person who had given her voice back. Silverwood demanded conformity, but Eleanor had never been good at following rules. The more Claudia pushed her warnings, the more Eleanor found herself watching Daniel. And the more she watched, the more the cracks in Silverwood's polished facade began to show. Because Daniel Carter was not what he appeared to be, and neither, Eleanor realized, was this community. And that was when the whispers turned into something louder. Claudia Whitmore was not the type to let go of control. If she couldn't shame Eleanor into pulling away, she would escalate, attacking Daniel directly and turning a neighborhood's quiet prejudice into open confrontation. Whispers in Silverwood rarely stayed whispers for long. Within days, Claudia Whitmore had turned quiet doubts into sharp accusations. She was relentless, weaving her narrative into every corner of the community. The morning coffee circle, the yoga studio, even the school pickup line. "Have you noticed how he lingers near the playground?" she told one mother. "He's far too familiar with the children," she said to another. By the end of the week, Daniel Carter was no longer invisible. He was under a magnifying glass, every movement scrutinized, every gesture twisted into suspicion. For Daniel, it was nothing new. He carried himself the same way he always did, arriving early, working methodically, moving with a calm rhythm. But beneath that calm, he could feel the eyes on him. The way conversations hushed when he passed, the pointed glances, the clipped greetings. Eleanor, meanwhile, was caught in the crossfire. Neighbors who had once smiled politely now offered her cautious warnings. "Be careful," one whispered. "You don't know what people like that are capable of." It wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It was about Eleanor daring to break the unspoken rules, daring to place her trust where others demanded she shouldn't. And Amelia, sweet, wide-eyed Amelia, was at the center of it all. Every afternoon she ran to Daniel as if pulled by an invisible thread. She peppered him with questions, her little voice bubbling with energy, eager to make up for lost years of silence. Daniel never rushed her, never dismissed her excitement. He answered with patience, kneeling in the grass, teaching her about the softness of soil, the names of flowers, the way the wind carried seeds across a lawn. Claudia watched it all with rising fury. To her, every laugh from Amelia was a personal affront, every smile from Eleanor a betrayal of her authority. Soon, the whispers hardened into action. One morning, Daniel arrived to find a letter taped to the maintenance shed. "Final warning," it read. "Inappropriate interactions with residents, violation of conduct. Next step, termination." The signature at the bottom was unmistakable: Claudia Whitmore. Daniel folded the paper neatly and slipped it into his pocket. No anger, no panic, just the quiet acceptance of someone who had walked this path before. His calmness unsettled Claudia even more. Later that afternoon, she confronted him outright in front of Amelia and Eleanor. "This has gone on long enough," Claudia snapped, her voice sharp enough to draw the attention of nearby parents. "You are here to do a job, not to fraternize with residents." Daniel stood, wiping the dirt from his hands, and met her glare with steady eyes. "With respect, Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his tone measured, "I'm here to maintain the grounds, but when a child greets me, I answer politely, nothing more." Amelia clutched his hand. "He's my friend," she said softly, but the words carried like a bell in the tense air. The playground froze. Mothers exchanged looks, torn between outrage and unease. Eleanor stepped closer, her expression unreadable, her mind a storm. She had spent sleepless nights replaying the scene of her daughter's first word, trying to understand why Daniel mattered so much. And each day that passed, she found herself less convinced by Claudia's accusations and more drawn to the quiet strength standing before her. Claudia, however, doubled down. That evening, she gathered her circle of allies in her immaculate living room, setting porcelain cups on polished glass tables. "We cannot allow this man to disrupt our community," she declared, tapping her spoon against her cup for emphasis. "If Eleanor won't see reason, then we must protect ourselves." The women nodded, their whispers mingling with the clinking of china. Plans were made, documents to collect, rumors to spread, a case to build. What they didn't realize was that every word spoken in that room would soon come back to haunt them. Because while Claudia tightened her grip, Daniel was not standing alone anymore. Eleanor was watching, listening, and quietly piecing together the truth. And in Amelia's laughter, in every word she spoke, Daniel's presence was proving impossible to ignore. What Claudia didn't expect was that Daniel Carter carried far more than a toolbox and a limp. Beneath his quiet exterior lay a past and a set of skills that would soon turn the balance of power in Silverwood upside down. For days after the letter appeared on the maintenance shed, Daniel kept working as if nothing had changed. He trimmed hedges, swept paths, and repaired a broken swing with the same quiet focus as always. But Eleanor noticed something no one else seemed to see. He wasn't rattled. Not by Claudia's whispers, not by the written threats. His calmness wasn't resignation, it was discipline. One afternoon, Eleanor lingered near the garden as Amelia darted ahead. The girl crouched beside Daniel, peppering him with questions about the flowers. Daniel answered gently, pointing out which petals close in the evening light, which leaves carried healing oils. His knowledge surprised Eleanor. "You sound like more than a gardener," she said softly, almost to herself. Daniel looked up, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Knowledge," he replied, "is like seed. It grows wherever you plant it, sometimes in places no one expects." Eleanor tilted her head. There was precision in the way he spoke, like someone used to being listened to. She decided then not to let her curiosity sit in silence any longer. That evening, while Amelia played nearby, Eleanor stepped closer. "Daniel," she began, carefully, "Amelia hasn't spoken in 3 years. Specialists, therapists, endless treatments, and then 2 minutes with you." Her voice trembled. "How did you do it?" Daniel wiped the dirt from his hands, choosing his words. "I've worked with people who lost their voices before, not just children. Sometimes trauma builds walls that no therapy can break. Sometimes it takes trust and patience." It wasn't the answer she expected, but it was an answer filled with experience, not guesswork. Eleanor's mind raced. He had said worked with people, not seen cases or read about them. His phrasing carried the weight of first-hand knowledge. Before she could press further, Amelia tugged her mother's hand. "Mommy, he showed me how to breathe so the words don't get stuck," she beamed, proud of her new trick. Eleanor's heart clenched. Not one of the highly paid therapists had ever explained it so simply. That night, Eleanor opened her laptop. She searched for Daniel Carter, combing through public records. The results were thin. Odd job histories, vague references, long stretches unaccounted for. Too little for a man who clearly carried so much. She closed the laptop with more questions than answers. Still, her instincts told her one thing with certainty. Claudia Whitmore was wrong. Whatever his past, Daniel was not a threat. He was the first real hope Amelia had known. The next morning, Eleanor made a quiet choice. She would stand closer, watch more carefully, learn what Claudia refused to see. And she wouldn't be the only one, because as the tension in Silverwood grew sharper, Claudia's crusade began to catch the attention of residents who weren't so sure anymore. Whispers of doubt turned in Daniel's favor. "If the gray girl spoke to him, maybe there's more to the story," one neighbor murmured at the cafe. Seeds of curiosity had been planted, though no one dared say it out loud in front of Claudia. For Daniel, allies were forming in unexpected corners, and for Eleanor, the first spark of defiance against Claudia's control had been lit. But sparks, once lit, are hard to contain, and soon the conflict would no longer be whispered in living rooms or hidden in warning letters. It would erupt into the open, in front of the entire community, forcing Daniel Carter to reveal exactly who he was, and leaving Claudia Whitmore with nowhere to hide. 2 weeks after the playground incident, Claudia Whitmore called an emergency meeting of the Silverwood Homeowners Association. The email she sent out framed it as a safety concern, but everyone in the community knew what it was really about: Daniel Carter. The event hall filled quickly that Saturday evening. Rows of chairs lined up in perfect order, polished chandeliers throwing golden light across anxious faces. Families gathered, some curious, others already convinced by Claudia's campaign of doubt. Whispers of doubt turned in Daniel's favor. "If the gray girl spoke to him, maybe there's more to the story," one neighbor murmured at the cafe. Seeds of curiosity had been planted, though no one dared say it out loud in front of Claudia. For Daniel, allies were forming in unexpected corners. And for Eleanor, the first spark of defiance against Claudia's control had been lit. But sparks, once lit, are hard to contain. And soon, the conflict would no longer be whispered in living rooms or hidden in warning letters. It would erupt into the open, in front of the entire community, forcing Daniel Carter to reveal exactly who he was and leaving Claudia Whitmore with nowhere to hide. 2 weeks after the playground incident, Claudia Whitmore called an emergency meeting of the Silverwood Homeowners Association. The email she sent out framed it as a safety concern, but everyone in the community knew what it was really about: Daniel Carter. The event hall filled quickly that Saturday evening. Rows of chairs lined up in perfect order, polished chandeliers throwing golden light across anxious faces. Families gathered, some curious, others already convinced by Claudia's campaign of doubt. At the front stood Claudia herself, posture straight, pearls glinting, a folder thick with papers resting on the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying with practiced authority, "we face a matter of grave importance. An individual employed in our community has displayed repeated disregard for the rules, and I have gathered evidence that his presence endangers the safety of our children." Murmurs rippled through the room. In the back row, Daniel sat quietly in his gardener's uniform, shoulders squared, gaze steady. He looked as though he'd prepared for this moment all his life. Claudia flipped through her folder. Here are the facts. This man, Daniel Carter, has a questionable history. My investigator has uncovered records of psychological struggles, long gaps in employment, and erratic behavior tied to his past in the military. She looked up, her expression solemn. This is not someone we can entrust around our families. A few residents nodded nervously. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Eleanor rose, her eyes fixed on Daniel. She had spent nights poring over documents of her own, speaking with contacts, piecing together the truth Claudia had twisted. But before she could speak, Daniel stood. His voice, calm but commanding, cut through the tension. "May I respond before judgment is passed?" Claudia's lips tightened. "You are an employee, Mr. Carter. You have no standing here." Daniel stepped forward, his limp barely noticeable as he crossed the aisle. "With respect, Mrs. Whitmore, if accusations are made against me in public, I believe the community deserves to hear the truth in public as well." A hush fell over the hall. For the first time, the balance of power shifted, not by force, but by presence. Daniel laid a sealed envelope on the podium, his hands steady. "My name is Dr. Daniel Carter," he began, his voice resonant, "former combat surgeon, United States Army, recipient of 2 Bronze Stars for Valor and a Presidential Certificate for Service. For years, I served in war zones, saving the lives of children pulled from rubble, sometimes with nothing but my bare hands and determination. That is the man you see before you, not a danger, not a liability." Gasps spread across the room. Claudia blinked, momentarily thrown off script. But Daniel wasn't finished. From his pocket, he pulled a small recorder. "And since we are sharing truths, perhaps the community should also hear this." He pressed play. Claudia's voice filled the hall, sharp and unmistakable. "Men like him always have an angle. You don't want your daughter tangled in something unseemly." The crowd stirred. A second recording followed, the voice of another resident, echoing suspicions that suddenly sounded less like concern and more like prejudice. Each snippet stripped away Claudia's careful mask. Claudia tried to protest, her words tumbling over themselves. "This is taken out of context. You don't understand." But Eleanor stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. "I understand perfectly." She turned to the room. 3 years. 3 years my daughter lived in silence. I spent more than $500,000 seeking help from the best in the world. Nothing worked. And then, within 2 minutes of meeting Daniel, Amelia spoke. She has not stopped speaking since. He gave my daughter her voice back. That is who he is. She reached into her briefcase and held up a set of papers. I verified his credentials. He is not only a decorated veteran, but also a certified child trauma specialist. The accusations against him are false. The real danger here is not Daniel Carter. It is prejudice, disguised as concern. The room erupted into whispers. Some faces flushed with shame, others with realization. Daniel stood silently beside Eleanor, his calm composure more powerful than any argument. Finally, he spoke once more. I never asked to be more than a gardener here. I took this work because no hospital would hire me. Not because I lacked the skill, but because doors often close to people who don't fit a certain picture. Still, when Amelia reached out, I couldn't ignore her. If kindness is against the rules, then perhaps the rules need changing. The silence that followed was heavy, almost sacred. Claudia, red-faced and trembling, tried one last time. "You're manipulating this community. You've planned this all along." Daniel shook his head gently. "The only thing I planned," he said, voice steady, "was to answer a child when she spoke." Eleanor placed a hand on his arm, steadying her own emotions. "And tonight," she added, turning toward Claudia, "it is you who must answer. For every false word, every attempt to silence the truth." The evidence was undeniable. The recordings, the documents, the living proof in Amelia's laughter. Everything painted a picture Claudia could no longer control. And for the first time in Silverwood, the audience that once feared her now looked away in quiet disapproval. By the end of that night, the balance of power in Silverwood had shifted forever. But the story did not end in the community hall. What came next would reshape not only Daniel's future, but the future of everyone who dared to believe in appearances over truth. When the meeting finally adjourned, the air in the Silverwood Hall felt heavier than when it began. Claudia Whitmore had walked in with her chin high, certain of her authority. She left with her shoulders tight, lips pressed in silence, as whispers trailed her down the aisle. For years, her word had been law in this community. That night, her voice carried no weight at all. The consequences arrived swiftly. Within days, legal notices were filed, allegings of defamation and harassment backed by the very recordings Claudia had once thought private. Her allies, once so quick to nod in agreement, now scrambled to distance themselves. Invitations dried up. Her name, once synonymous with prestige, became a warning. For Daniel Carter, life changed in equal measure, but in the opposite direction. The morning after the meeting, he returned to Silverwood not with a cart of tools, but with Amelia running beside him, chattering freely. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now stopped him with hesitant smiles, some offering apologies, others simply stunned into silence. Daniel accepted their words with the same calm he always carried, gracious but not indulgent. Eleanor, true to her promise, extended more than gratitude. At a press conference later that week, she introduced Daniel as the new director of human development for her company. Standing beside her at the podium, in a suit that fit like it belonged to him all along, Daniel spoke not of revenge or vindication, but of opportunity. "There are voices in this world we fail to hear," he told the crowd. "Children locked in silence, veterans dismissed because of scars, neighbors overlooked because of appearances. My work now is to make sure no voice is ignored, no life written off too quickly." The applause was steady, sincere, and long overdue. 6 months later, Silverwood had changed in ways no one predicted. The playground where Amelia first whispered hello was renamed Dr. Daniel Carter Park, a unanimous vote by the same residents who once doubted him. Children played freely there, their laughter carrying a different weight now, lighter, fuller, unshadowed by rules of exclusion. Amelia thrived. She filled her mother's home with stories, songs, endless curiosity. "When I grow up," she told anyone who would listen, "I want to help kids find their voices, just like Daniel helped me." Eleanor herself found transformation too. For years, she had balanced power and loss, armor and grief. Watching Daniel rise reminded her that leadership wasn't about dominance, but about lifting others. Together, they built programs that reached far beyond Silverwood. Initiatives for children with communication disorders, scholarships for veterans seeking new careers, partnerships with cities across the state. And Claudia? The last anyone heard, she had moved quietly out of Silverwood. Her husband, weary of her endless battles, had chosen another path. The influence she clung to had slipped away, not with drama, but with silence, the same silence she had once mocked in Amelia. One evening, Daniel returned to the park just as the sun dipped low. Amelia spotted him first and sprinted across the grass. "Uncle Daniel, did you hear? I'm in the school recital next week. Will you come?" He smiled, crouching down to her level. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Eleanor watched from nearby, the golden light catching the quiet pride on Daniel's face. In that moment, she understood. Justice hadn't just restored his dignity, it had created something bigger. A future rooted in resilience, in compassion, in the simple act of refusing to stay invisible. But even as life in Silverwood settled, one truth remained clear. Daniel Carter was no longer just a gardener. He had become a symbol. And the story of how one quiet man gave a child her voice and a community its conscience was far from over. The evening sun painted Silverwood Park in shades of amber, the playground alive with children's laughter. The new sign at the entrance gleamed, Dr. Daniel Carter Park. To most, it was just a name. But to those who had witnessed the past months unfold, it was a reminder that truth and dignity could outlast even the loudest voices of doubt. Amelia was the loudest of all now, not in volume, but in joy. She ran across the grass, calling to friends, her voice clear and strong. Each word was a testament to the day she found the courage to speak, not in the office of a specialist, but in the presence of a man the world had overlooked. Daniel stood nearby, watching with quiet pride. He no longer wore the faded uniform of a gardener, but a tailored suit that still somehow carried the earth's steadiness in its fabric. Success hadn't changed his posture. If anything, it had rooted him deeper in humility. Beside him, Eleanor spoke softly. "You know, you could have walked away, taken the promotion, left Silverwood behind, and never looked back." Daniel's gaze lingered on Amelia, then on the families gathering in the park. "Walking away might have been easier," he admitted, "but if I did, nothing here would change. And change is the only reason any of this matters." His words echoed a truth larger than the park, larger than Silverwood. They spoke to anyone who had ever been underestimated, anyone who had ever been silenced, anyone who had ever been judged by surface instead of substance. For Claudia Whitmore, her downfall had been swift. For Daniel Carter, his rise was steady. But this story was never just about punishment or reward. It was about perspective, about how quickly arrogance can crumble and how quietly resilience can rebuild. As the last light of day stretched across the park, Amelia ran up, holding a dandelion puff. "Uncle Daniel," she said, her eyes bright, "if I blow all the seeds, will they carry wishes everywhere?" Daniel knelt beside her. "Not just wishes," he smiled. "They carry possibilities, and sometimes possibilities grow into something stronger than anyone imagined." She blew gently, and the seeds scattered into the fading light, tiny sparks floating into the evening sky. And in that moment, the story of Silverwood settled into its final truth. Strength is not found in titles or wealth. It is found in patience, in dignity, in the courage to turn silence into song and prejudice into purpose. Because the greatest victories aren't about defeating others. They're about creating a world where every voice is heard, every life has value, and every child, no matter how small, can believe that their words matter. At its heart, this story reminds us that true worth is never written on the surface. Titles, wealth, or polished appearances may impress for a time, but character, patience, kindness, resilience lasts far longer. Daniel's journey shows us that prejudice, no matter how deeply rooted, can be confronted not with anger, but with quiet strength and undeniable truth. And little Amelia reminds us that even the smallest voice, once given space, can carry a message powerful enough to change a community. In life, many of us encounter invisible walls, misjudgments, stereotypes, or the quiet dismissal of our potential. It's easy to shrink back into silence. Yet, as the old saying goes, still waters run deep. Sometimes the most underestimated among us carry wisdom and strength the world desperately needs. When we dare to step forward, when we refuse to let fear or unfair judgment define us, we not only reclaim our own dignity, but often open doors for others too. The lesson is simple but profound. Never measure a person by what they seem to be on the outside. Look deeper, listen longer, and remember that courage isn't always loud. It's often the quiet insistence on truth, respect, and compassion. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What part of this story touched you the most? Have you ever seen someone's hidden strength revealed in an unexpected way? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd be honored to read them. If this story gave you something to reflect on, please give it a like to support the channel. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next powerful, thought-provoking story. Thank you for spending this time with us. May your days ahead be filled with peace, clarity, and the quiet hope that even in chaos, there is always light waiting to break through.